على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد، والصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ قال لقمان لابنه وهو يعظه يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Carrying on our discussion of Surah Al-Luqman. Last night, or the last session, we discussed the importance of Shirk and how the first advice of Luqman to his son was to abstain, was to reject the entire concept of Shirk altogether. And we mentioned that Shirk within the religion of Islam, as it is understood by the message of the Ahl al-Bayt, are of two types. The first is the Shirk which is known from its apparent nature, when a person believes, when a person worships an idol and believes in that idol's rububiyyah, for example, the lordship or the omnipotence of that idol, that all of his ni'amat or some of his ni'amat come from this idol, and that if they want an increment in some of their ni'amat in their lives, then they would refer to that particular idol or illustration or whatever it is. The second part of Shirk, which will inshallah be the course of our discussion tonight, is what is known as Shirk al-Khafi. But before going into that discussion, a question is raised. And the question is a very interesting question with regards to our discussion from last night. The question is, if you look towards modern day polytheism, you'll find or you'll come across polytheists who believe in one God, the omnipotent God, the supreme being. But then they have, for example, many different other gods who are of a less caliber than that one supreme being. Like a pyramid, on top of the pyramid you have the one supreme God, and then underneath him you have all of these different gods of different levels and so on and so forth. And when you come across this particular idea and notion, it comes to us, or it seems to us, that modern day polytheists worship that one God, using these small gods as a medium to that one supreme Lord. So isn't this the concept of monotheism, but with extra steps? In the sense that, at the end of the day, they just worship one God, but they use all of these small divine gods, for example, deities, to reach and seek proximity towards that one supreme God. And it's an interesting discussion. And amongst our ulama, they came forward and they said, modern day polytheism, in fact, is not different from the polytheism that existed in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even before the Holy Prophet of Islam. What's interesting is when you go into the annals of history, you find that Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he migrated towards Mecca and the city of Mecca, he, of course, the famous story in the Holy Quran and in history, with his son built the Kaaba. And when he built the Kaaba, slowly the people began to populate that area. The Zamzam water sprang from the ground, and all of a sudden the people began to reside in that area, the area of Mecca. And they began to populate that particular area. But prior to Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, it was a deserted land. Nabi Ibrahim historically, Quranically established Tawheed by rebuilding the Kaaba. Over the course of history, however many thousands of years it was until the coming of Rasulullah, from that point that Nabi Ibrahim established Tawheed, established monotheism, it changed somewhere along the line and it became a polytheistic society. So the question was raised, how did it change from a monotheistic society to a polytheistic society, for then Rasulullah to come back and to re-establish monotheism? And there are many questions. There are at least 8 or 9, perhaps even 10 different answers that have been elaborated on by the ulama, explaining why people chose polytheism and why they abandoned the nature of monotheism. But one of these answers is very clear, and one of these answers is very interesting. And the answer is because people find it easier to worship something that they can see, that they can feel. A mind, for example, the mind feels more easy when it can see what it is worshipping, when it can understand what it is worshipping. And because it's easy from that dimension, what happened was the people began to manipulate, they began to concoct idols and represent that as gods. And because their minds were so weak, and because their minds allowed it, and it was very easy for them to understand the whole concept of worshipping something that they could see and something that they could examine and observe, they took on it. They accepted it very easily. And also became something that was completely natural and something that was accepted widely by the whole community. So it's very easy for the human mind to worship something that it can see, something that it can observe. Now when you look at polytheism, or the religion, or the different polytheistic religions, what they do is they have the Supreme Lord, but at times it's very difficult to imagine that this one person has all of the divine attributes. In fact, one of the reasons why the Meccan society used to worship many idols was because it was very difficult for them to believe that there is one supreme being who has all of the powers that they can ever imagine. The power of giving life, the power of extending life, the power of giving rizq, the power of, for example, giving health. It was very difficult for them to imagine this. So they used to compartmentalize and fragment the power of this supreme being into different idols. And they gave these different idols, these different fictitious characters, different powers. So they had, for example, there was an idol, for example, that was in charge of giving rizq. There was an idol that was in charge of giving health. There was an idol that was in charge of giving wealth, for example, and so on and so forth. Many of these idols were given different characteristics, and they were known for these characteristics. Now here's what the answer was given. Now there are 2 answers that were given by the ulama, and both of these answers are very, very effective for us to understand what position modern day polytheism holds within our understanding and the understanding of the Holy Quran. If you look at modern day polytheists, and when they worship the different idols that they have, despite believing in that one supreme Lord or one supreme God, what is their view of these individual idols? Do they believe that these idols have independent power? Meaning, do these idols have power that is independent from this one supreme Lord? If yes, then this is shirk. Because in a sense, from one perspective, they don't need to refer to the one supreme God. They can refer to this idol that is under the supreme God, because he is independent or she is independent from that supreme God. And this is what we see in this day and age. You have an idol, for example, that is in charge of rizq. Rather than asking from the supreme God, we ask from this particular idol. As long as we believe that this idol is independent from that supreme God, then that becomes or comes under the umbrella and the manifestations of shirk. The second answer that was described is a Quranic answer. Refer to the ayat of the Holy Quran, and the ayat of the Holy Quran is very clear. ما نعبدهم إلا ليقربونا إلى الله الزلفى. That the Quraysh of Mecca, they used to come forward and they used to say, we worship these idols, but we worship these idols with the intention of seeking proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the argument is put forward saying that modern day polytheists, they worship the one supreme God, but they believe in the one supreme God, but they worship all of these different gods as a means to attain proximity towards that one supreme God. This is what the people of Quraysh used to do. They used to worship all of the idols in order to seek proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah categorizes this as a form of shirk and condemns it within the Quran as well. Ending our discussion with the apparent nature of shirk, let's move on to the discussion which is considered to be or considered by the language of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi as shirk al-khafi or shirk al-makhfi, shirk al-asghar. When his companions came forward and said, Ya Rasulullah, what is shirk al-asghar? He came forward and he said, Ar-riya. Riya is shirk al-asghar, to show off. And it's a very interesting discussion. And the reason why this discussion is very interesting is because when you come to the language of our fuqaha as well as our ulama, they came forward and they said that when in the religion of Islam, for our ibadah to be accepted, and we have been created for ibadah, Allah has given us the opportunity of life so that we can turn to Him and obey Him and worship Him as much as possible before we leave this world. Now, when an act is considered to be ibadah, it requires two things. If these two things exist, then that act will be considered as an act of ibadah. Number one, the physical form, the physical actions that we carry out. So when you look at salah, salah is a combination of different actions. Put all of these, combine all of these actions, and you have something that is known as salah. So the first aspect or the first element is actions. The second element is that of the niyyah, the intention that the person holds. A person cannot worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if he is negligent, if he is in short of these two elements. There is no ibadah without niyyah and there is no ibadah without action. Both have to go hand in hand for that action to be considered as ibadah. Now there was a discussion amongst the ulama. A very interesting question was raised. And the question was, which one is greater, the action or the niyyah? And you find Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi as well as the A'immat al-Athhar alayhim as-salam, they have a very phenomenal hadith where they came forward and they said that the niyyah is better than the act itself. You find, for example, وَالنِّيَّةُ أَفْضَلُ مِنَ الْعَمَلِ, the niyyah is better than the act itself. Now we understand that the niyyah is better than the act, but why? Why is the niyyah considered to be better than the action? They said that the niyyah is considered to be better than the action because if you were to examine what the niyyah is and you were to examine what the action is, its understanding, its elements are different. Its characteristics are different. How so? I said, look at the action. The action is something physical. You can actually see it, you can observe it, you can interact with it. You see a person praying in the mosque, you can actually see him engaging in ibadah. Whereas the niyyah is not something that you can see. It's not something that you can observe. It's only something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to understand. A being like Allah can only understand what the niyyah is. And because the niyyah is that profound, it is better than the action. Our ulama came forward and said this idea, although it makes sense, although there is some grounding to it, it's not really the answer that we're looking for. It's not really a very strong answer. It's actually a very weak answer. The second answer that was given, or the second opinion that was shared by the ulama, they came forward and they said that the niyyah is greater than the ibadah, because when you look at the action of the human being, the ibadah of the human being, the ibadah, as we said, is of two: action and niyyah, intention. Now, the action without the intention holds no value, but the intention without the action, it's not useless. It does hold value. The intention without the action holds value, whereas the action without the intention holds no value. And of course, there's a deep discussion behind this, which is beyond our time. The ulama came forward and said that the intention that the mu'min has to perform an action, even if he does not perform the action, it is far better and far greater and far stronger than if he was to perform an action without the niyyah. So this was the second opinion, and this is the more correct opinion. This is the official opinion as to why the niyyah is greater than the amal. In fact, it gave rise to a third opinion, and the third opinion was something very beautiful that we need to remind ourselves with. And the reason why we need to remind ourselves with this particular concept is because sometimes we make the religion of Islam harder for ourselves. The third opinion said that when you engage in dua, when you engage in salah, when you engage in sadaqah, we realize that these are actions that allow us to gain proximity towards Allah. But I, as a human being, I fall short constantly. At times, I don't have the energy or, for example, the motivation or the encouragement to stand up for Salat al-Layl, for example. But then the ulama came forward and said, but if you have developed the intention of reciting Salat al-Layl, that suffices. Now let me explain what this means. Imagine I read a few ahadith about Salat al-Layl, and I popped myself up that I said to myself, right, half an hour before the time of Fajr, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to recite Salat al-Layl. It turns out I went to sleep, for example. I have the intention of waking up. I have the intention of Salat al-Layl. But unfortunately, for one reason or another, I woke up late and I was unable to recite Salat al-Layl. I woke up during the time of Fajr. So I got up and I missed the opportunity of Salat al-Layl. Here the ulama came forward and they said that this person will be rewarded for his intention. It would be as if he has recited Salat al-Layl. I'll give you another example. When a person comes to the center, and before coming to the center on a Thursday night, he says to himself, tonight is the night that I will read Dua Kumail. And I will read it in a way that my heart is present. I will examine every line of it. I will try and be cognizant of what the message is telling me, and so on and so forth. He comes to the center after a long, hard day of work. He comes to the center, he sits down, and obviously his mind goes from one direction to another. Dua Kumail is being recited, but he's not aware of what is being recited. And so his mind is everywhere. As in, he made a commitment to himself that he will be cognizant throughout Dua Kumail, but he wasn't able to. Or for example, he's not able to come to the mosque entirely. Something came up, something important came up. He had to address the issue, and unfortunately it took a lot of his time, his energy, and so on and so forth. And he was unable to perform that particular action. The ulama came forward and said that this person will be rewarded for his intention. I'll give you another example. I want to perform sadaqah. I know that wealth or a sum of wealth will come into my hands. And if this wealth was to come into my hands, I will give sadaqah from it. The wealth comes into my hands, there is an emergency, I need to go buy medicine, I need to go buy food, whatever it is, I was not able to give sadaqah. Ulama explained that the niyyah here is not something that can be ignored. The niyyah here will allow the person to be rewarded because the person has made a commitment for himself inside that he would most definitely perform the amal if the circumstances were correct, if the circumstances were right. But unfortunately the circumstances didn't arise and he was not able to perform that action. So here, this discussion with regards to the niyyah and the action, the physical action that is carried out, these two are the formulas of ibadah. Now with regards to this discussion of niyyah, you have at times people who have the wrong niyyah, and you have at times where the people have the right niyyah. The people who have the wrong niyyah, you find that their understanding or their position, according to the understanding of the Holy Quran, is not a very good position to be in. When a person, for example, wants to carry out ibadat, and he has the wrong niyyah, he has the wrong niyyah to carry out these ibadats. In fact, Allah condemns them in the Quran. And not only that, but according to the riwayat of the Holy Prophets and the A'imma alayhim as-salam, they are condemned by the words of the Ma'sumeen. Because the one who has the wrong niyyah, the one who does not interact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with purely pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but pleasing the people around him, for example, you find such people are condemned within the holy texts. And you find that the Holy Prophet of Islam, when he begins to speak about this dimension, the dimension of Shirk al-Asghar, he says that Shirk al-Asghar is what is labeled as Riya. Riya comes from the word Ra'a, to see. Ra'a means to see. Ira means to allow one to see. The word Riya therefore means that when a person does something, he does it with the intention of making sure that the others are shown that particular action. I do something with the intention that others see what I am doing. And therefore, in English, in simple language, it is translated as showing off. Riya means to show off. When I use ibadat as different tactics to show off and show people how religious I am, and this can happen in 3 different domains, either in aqa'id, where I show the people that I have the correct belief and I have strong belief, for example, or this can happen in akhlaq, to show the people that I have the best of morals and ethics and etiquettes, for example, or it can happen in the areas of ibadat, that when I pray in front of people, I pray in such a way that the people are awed by my prayers. Yes, that I receive praises for the types of prayers that I conduct, the types of recitation that I engage with, and so on and so forth. The opposite of Riya is what is known as Ikhlas. Ikhlas from the word Khalis, that when a person is absolutely pure from within. Pure in the sense that whatever I do, it is towards Allah, it is directed towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. And therefore you find that within many narrations, within many ayahs of the Holy Quran, Allah praises those who are mukhlis, those who are completely sincere, absolutely sincere from the depths of their hearts. That when they pray, when they engage in ibadah, it is towards Allah that they direct their energy and they direct their different forms of worship. And lastly, before I end, there's an interesting hadith of Imam Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, which is most definitely befitting this type of a discussion. When the Imam alayhi salam was asked about the ayah of the Holy Quran, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed us in this world to try us, to test us, and to see, to examine us, to see which one of us are the best in deeds. The Imam alayhi salam was asked, what is the tafsir of this particular verse? The Imam replies that this verse is referring to a very specific concept. It is not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees which one of you are the best in deeds in terms of the quantity. لَيْسَ يَعْنِ أَكْثَرُ عَمَلًا وَلَكِنْ أَسْوَبَكُمْ عَمَلًا. But it is to show which one of you are authentic in the amal that you carry out. How do you carry out your amal? What type of an intention do you have within you? That is what counts with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As when you look at the human being, we human beings, we assess the effects of an action, we measure the action by its effects. If I want to see how great of an action I've committed or I've performed, I look at the effects. This is how we measure success in dunya. You look at an employee, for example. The employee is valued by his output. You look at a businessman. A businessman is valued by his output and how much profits he makes. Again, it's the effects of his business that measures the quality of his business. You look at a student in a university, for example. A top leading student is measured by his grades and his interactions with his professors, for example. So all of our actions, as long as we are part of dunya, and this is something uqala'i, this is something conventionally understood, this is common sense, that the action is determined by the effects. But you find that our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like this. Our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely, totally different. Allah does not measure our relationship with Him due to our time that we spend with Him, the effects of our ibadat. Meaning, how much of my ibadat do I engage with Him, which then allows me to understand how close I am to Him. Allah doesn't take this into consideration. What Allah takes into consideration is what is within the hearts. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says it's not how much quantity wise of ibadah that you engage with, it's about the quality of the ibadah that you engage with. As in, it's not necessary for a person to recite dua iftitah from cover to cover. It's not necessary for a person to recite the Quran, every part of the Quran from cover to cover, from every page, 20 pages a day. No. If a person is not able to carry on these types of ibadah, it is best for you to take a fragment of dua al-iftitah, a fragment of dua kumail, a fragment of the verses of the Holy Quran, to sit, to examine, to understand it, to perform the tafsir of it. It's not about the quantity in the religion of Islam, it's all about the quality. And this is what Allah takes into consideration. And then the Imam alayhi salam ends the hadith. He says, Al-ibqa'u ala al-amal hatta yakhlusa ashaddu min al-amal. He says that a person, for him to carry on the amal, to carry on the action, is far more difficult and far more greater in terms of severity and difficultness than the action itself. It's easy for a person to start off the action with the best of intentions, but then as he is performing the action, as he is engaging in that ibadah, it is very easy for his intention to change. And according to the Imam alayhi salam, it is hard for us to maintain that the quality of ikhlas within our hearts. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that tawfiq, to give us the understanding and the ma'rifah, to rid us of any forms of riya within our hearts, and to focus ourselves and to make sure that we turn to Him with ikhlas. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.